Spotlight is proudly sponsored by HEC Media.
Today on Spotlight, how the bicycling craze of the 1890s paved the way for women to assert their independence. Plus, pickleball and injuries, how the fastest growing sport in the U.S. is also sending people to the ER. And then an inspirational true story about American underdogs who ended up winning gold at the Olympics. But first, speaking of the Olympics, how St. Louis played a part in making it what it is today. It's Sunday and you're watching the multiple Emmy Award winning Spotlight.
Mention 1904 to a longtime St. Louisan, and these are the images that will surely come to mind. But many have forgotten the World's Fair had a companion event that changed the world of sports: the first American Olympics.
Sports was just starting in the United States. Sports didn't really become a thing till after the Civil War, when we had a little more leisure time and everything like that. So it was really an introduction of sports to a lot of the United States.
In many ways, the 1904 Games were very little like today's Olympics, with events that looked more like a cross between a high school track meet and a family picnic. But the St. Louis Games did leave a lasting mark on today's Olympics.
There were some real good innovations here. One of the biggest legacy that St. Louis gave to the Olympics is we're the birthplace of the gold medal. So we said we're going to do gold, silver, and bronze. And that's how it's been ever since.
With the help of Olympic historian Michael Lloyd, we hear some of the more rarely told stories about the 1904 Olympics and how the St. Louis Games turned what was nearly a defeated dream into a global sensation.
We introduced the Games to the United States. They were coming off life support in Paris. Had America not gotten behind the Olympics, I don't think they would have succeeded as we know them today. And the reason America got behind them was a lot to do with the 1904 Olympics.
Are the rings still out of WashU?
They are. It's a beautiful sculpture right by the stadium where they hosted the Olympics, which is the oldest modern-day Olympic stadium.
Athens, Paris, St. Louis. One of these things is not like the other.
Right.
How did St. Louis manage to snag the third Olympics?
Right. So Pierre de Coubertin originally wanted it to go to London. Because again, that's the father of modern sports. And after Paris, it was pretty much on life support. So, and England's like, nah, we do not want it at all. Those games are so bad, it'd be a frost if it came to England, is what they said. So America was the only one who was interested in it. James E. Sullivan, who was the Amateur Athletic Union president, really wanted him here. Coubertin hated James Sullivan. James Sullivan hated Coubertin. So Coubertin reached out to a friend of his at the University of Chicago to kind of pull it away from Sullivan's grasp. And that's where St. Louis stepped in, because they were set for 1904. The World's Fair was actually set for 1903, which not too many people know about it, but delays caused it to be pushed another year in construction. So once it reached 1904, it was David Francis, who was former governor, former mayor of St. Louis, the person who was in charge of bringing the World's Fair to St. Louis. He said, I want those Olympic Games. He said, there's not going to be another international competition or event in the United States this summer outside of St. Louis. We built the first modern-day stadium. If you ever look at the Athens Stadium, it was one of the ancient stadiums that they refurbished, and the track has this wicked hairpin turn that was not good for any runner. So we built a third-of-a-mile track. It was the first modern-day track built at the time for the Olympics. We built the stadium. We had the first announcer here. We put signs up and did chalk lines so the audience could follow, the throws and everything like that. So there were some real good innovations here. We had baseball, we had college football, Track was a known entity, but beyond that, nothing else. Swimming was really unheard of in the United States.
Well, I understand David Francis wasn't even that interested in sports.
He wasn't that interested in sports, but he saw it as a key asset for the 1904 World's Fair. And that's why he wanted it. So, I mean, Dave Francis was a visionary, too, and I think he saw the potential of what this could be. But it was the most foreign athletes on U.S. soil ever.
Other than Francis Field, are there any other physical relics left from those days?
Some of that stadium is still the original stadium.
Really?
Which is pretty incredible. At the time, it was the biggest concrete stadium structure, I think, at the time. Which is kind of neat. But the part of Francis Field that you still see now, the stadium, that is still the original 1904.
I think, was wrestling new at the 1904 game?
I believe they did have wrestling. Basketball was new. And boxing, I believe, was new. And that was here.
So that sort of begs the question, what is St. Louis's legacy with regard to the modern day Olympics?
Well, the biggest legacy internationally is probably the gold, silver, bronze medal. And the second biggest thing is we introduced the games to the United States. Had America not gotten behind the Olympics, I don't think they would have succeeded as we know them today. And the reason America got behind them was a lot to do with the 1904 Olympics.
To find out about the Olympic events they used to have but don't anymore, watch the full interview at hecmedia.org.
HEC Media. Recognized, celebrated, honored time and again for excellence in the industry. Mid-America Emmys, Tellys, NATOAs, Auroras, and other awards. HEC Media has been bringing home the hardware for over a decade. Hundreds of nominations and wins, from regional to international levels. Arts and education, to author talks, magazine shows and documentaries, individual craft achievements to overall excellence, plus so much more. And although doing good work is its own reward, recognition, well, it's nice too. See what all the fuss is about. Find all of the award-winning content at hecmedia.org.
History Spotlight, brought to you by HEC Media and the Missouri Historical Society.
Hello, I'm Dr. Jody Sowell, president of the Missouri Historical Society in St. Louis, and this is History Spotlight. Wheel fever is a term used to describe the bicycling craze of the 1890s, a period marked by both enjoyment and controversy. K-12 Programs Coordinator Emily Kelso sheds light on how this phenomenon paved the way for women to assert their independence.
Riding a bicycle is fun. We take it a bit for granted these days, but early in the history of bike riding, it was a sensation. It was also something more. It was a way for women to free themselves from the confines of the oppressive restraints of fashion and find fun, personal independence, and freedom. In the summer of 1896, the United States was stricken with wheel fever. Bicycling became a verified mania, and St. Louisans were some of the most enthusiastic riders. In 1896, St. Louis reported $2 million in bicycle sales. At $75 a bike, that's over 27,000 bicycles in a city of 500,000 people. One St. Louis reporter was astonished when he counted more than 2,800 bike riders passing the corner of 4th and Walnut in a single morning's commute. While complaints were plenty about bicycles clogging the streets and scorchers flying past pedestrians in city parks, the biggest controversy was that women wanted to ride bikes too, and they were taking off their dresses to do it. Because a long dress made pedaling nearly impossible and could get dangerously snagged in the gears of a bicycle, many women adopted baggy, knee-length pants called bloomers that left their lower legs free. With their nether limbs exposed, as one astonished St. Louis reporter put it, bloomer girls dominated news about bicycling. Women's rights advocates praised bloomers for freeing women from fashion bondage, while others vilified bloomers as immodest or even ruinous to the social order. One anti-women biking St. Louis newspaper article displayed before and after illustrations of pale beauties transformed into perfect frights by bicycle riding, with wind-blown hair, sun-flushed cheeks, and of course, bloomers on display. These illustrations meant to terrify, but must have actually looked wonderfully enticing to countless St. Louis women. While wheel fever quickly peaked and fizzled around the late 1890s, the battles over women's fashion and freedom that bicycling sparked were part of a much wider pushing back against the Victorian era's strict social rules. For St. Louis women in 1896, bloomers and bicycles were more than just new clothes and transportation. They were a doorway to personal independence, friendship, increased self-esteem, and the things society so often stole from their lives, a source of fun.
Next week on History Spotlight, a style of house named after a fish.
To learn more about the Missouri Historical Society, visit mohistory.org.
HEC has been bringing you positive programming and award-winning content for decades. Arts, education, culture, in-depth discussions, films, and more. All in one place, hecmedia.org.
The fastest growing sport in America is not yet an Olympic sport, but imagine the possibilities with a little more time for the sport to enthusiastically spread across the globe.
Pickleball becoming an Olympic sport, yeah, that's something I'm actually looking forward to.
Dr. Olu Owoye at St. Louis University just started playing this cross between tennis, badminton, and table tennis.
I have a pickleball court on my back patio at the back of my house.
Owoye is also closely observing the sport for medical reasons.
What we find is people just jump into playing and they just want to have fun without being ready for the demands of the sport.
Pickleball injuries seen in emergency rooms are soaring.
It's based on emergency record. They have more of, strains and sprains.
He says there's countless more than that.
I think it's more of overuse injuries. You do a lot of recurrent movements, a lot of pivoting, changing direction, sudden deceleration, acceleration, backpedaling, shuffling to the side, to the front. Emergency records don't show us that kind of data.
OYA says the ER data does not offer an accurate picture of the injuries because the patients aren't aware of the moment their problems really started to happen. He says there is a need for pickleball-specific interventions.
It's just important for us to start understanding the mechanism of injury so that we can help players stay safe in the sports.
OYA is also the director of the Translational Sports Injury Prevention Lab at St. Louis University. It's part of the Integrated Health and Movement Science Lab. Here, he conducts research to optimize movement for the advancement of sports performance training and sports injury prevention. While studying injury prevention for sports like football, basketball, soccer, and volleyball, pickleball is topping his list for being one of the most interesting sports to study for many reasons.
I got to know about pickleball just about a year and a half ago when, I talked with a clinician who was working with pickleball athletes who were having injuries, and he wanted to know how to prevent these injuries.
So his lab is launching a series of studies under what he calls SPIN, an acronym for Surveillance in Pickleball Players to reduce injury burden. First, they're recruiting 3,000 pickleball players, ages 18 and up, all skill levels, for the first phase of the study, which is simply a participation and injury survey. All the player needs is the link on SLU's website or this QR code to get started.
To see what part of the body is mostly affected, to see what types of injuries players are having, and beyond injuries, what type of pain they're having, and to know the circumstances around the injuries that they're having and the pain that they're having. So for us to fix the problem, we need to understand the problem, and that's the first step. Establish data that would lead us towards evidence-informed prevention strategies. So because you can only fix a problem that you understand. We're looking at preventing injuries from happening in the first place and preventing the onset of pain. But we also have to think about preventing the escalation of pain to something bigger.
He says there is a misconception that pickleball is a soft sport, as it is considered a low-impact sport. But he says this is all misleading.
Pickleball is not a soft spot.
The overuse injuries really sneak up on players.
Beyond injuries, many folks are having pain, and they continue to play pickleball because they love the sport, and I think that's an issue.
People will pick up and play without properly stretching, proper warm-ups, supportive gear, the right shoes, or even knowing the right technique.
So that you don't keep using your body the wrong way. So these are the things we're going to be looking out for from the data that we're collecting. And these are going to be very important information that's going to help specific interventions.
He hopes to keep people healthy and keep them on the court for years to come.
Oh, nice shot.
Later on Spotlight, learn the history and techniques of fencing. The hit movie Boys in the Boat was first a New York Times best-selling book by author Dan Brown. HEC Media's Angie Weidinger sat down with Dan to discuss this inspirational, true story.
Lengthen. Lengthen. Go.
It's one of those sports just watching makes you tired.
Give me everything, boys!
Rowers today, like rowers of yesterday, don't row for fame. And yet one would think this rowing team would have received a bit more of that, given their incredible accomplishment in 1936.
These sons of loggers and fishermen coming from the woods of western Washington, they were something of a shock and very much a breath of fresh air.
Boats back then were filled with sons of senators from Ivy League schools, not boys who could barely scrape enough money together to attend a state college. But these University of Washington rowing team members not only beat the odds to win against teams in the U.S., they went on to win gold in the 1936 Berlin Olympics, a race watched by a swastika-wearing crowd that included Adolf Hitler. It's a story of American underdogs who reminded a Depression-era nation what could be done when everyone quite literally pulls together.
This is a story that literally walked into my life in the person of my neighbor, a lady I knew then only as Judy. She'd been reading one of my earlier books to her father, and he was living under hospice care at her house. He was in the last couple months of his life. And he was enjoying that book, and she asked if I'd come down to meet him.
That man was Joe Rance, one of the rowing team members from Washington. His heartwarming story led Brown on a 6-year journey to research the challenges of rowing, the Depression, and Nazi Germany, and ultimately write The Boys in the Boat.
The research ran everything from traditional library research, looking up newspaper articles from the 1930s on microfilm, to much more unconventional things like finding out what time the sun comes up in Poughkeepsie, New York on the day of a particular race, to a lot of conversations with the family members of the 9 young men who are at the heart of this story. They were very, very eager to help, and so I sat for probably 100 hours talking to the family members and learning about each of their fathers or grandfathers, whatever the case might be. And so the research was very sweeping, and I just tried to take information from wherever I could get it.
So you talk about the 9 boys in the boat, and you really feel like you get to know them as a reader. They almost become your friend. But the one that you are rooting for as a reader the most is Joe Rance. How long did you know him before he passed?
Well, Joe only lived a couple of months after I started talking to him, and I spent as much time as I could talking to him while he was alive, and I think he enjoyed that a lot. But then after Joe passed away, his daughter Judy had spent the last several years following her dad around literally with a notepad, writing down every recollection he had about this whole sequence of events. And so after Joe was gone, I spent hundreds of hours with Judy as she helped me sort of flesh out her dad's part of the story.
That explains a lot, because there's so much detail in this book. I mean, that's what really transports you back.
A lot of the heart basically comes from Judy. She just adored her dad. And many of the sessions we had when we talked through the story involved a lot of tears on her part. because he had recently passed away. But I couldn't have begun to write the book without her. When I finished the book and I sat back and I thought to myself, what does this story mean to me? I realized that this story of these 9 young men who got in a boat and learned to pull together and do these extraordinary things is a pretty good metaphor for that generation of Americans who found themselves in the same boat of the Depression, who had to learn humility because of the suffering that they went through, and had to open their hearts to one another and learn to get together and get along and do great things.
Watch the full interview at hecmedia.org.
With every stroke of the bow, every stroke of the brush, with every stroke of genius, the arts make life in St. Louis richer, not just emotionally, but also economically. In our region, the arts create $869 million a year in economic activity, supporting 12,000 jobs, generating $155 million for state and local governments, with more than 8 million annual arts-related visits. That's more than all St. Louis sporting events combined. Whether in a park, on a street, or a wall, experimental or a classic, the arts deserve our support, because the arts help support us. HEC Media is proud to be our region's home for arts, education, and culture, because in St. Louis, the arts mean business.
We opened Fence St. Louis in March of 2023. We're a women-owned and women-led business located in Shrewsbury in the St. Louis metropolitan area. We teach saber exclusively to ages 5 all the way up through any age of adults. Fencing comes out of swordsmanship, of course, where it was useful to have a way to practice swordsmanship without actually lethally killing your opponent. You wanted to be able to be prepared in some way, so you had to have ways to practice. The modern history of fencing is that in the late 1800s is when fencing became popular more as a sport than as a method of trying to kill somebody or to duel or anything like that. So when it became more of a sport, different organizations popped up across the world that were promoting the sport-specific side of it. It is one of the few disciplines that's been in the modern Olympics since the inception of the modern Olympics in 1896. So there are 3 different types of fencing weapons. There's épée, foil, and saber. Épée is probably the most popular in the United States in terms of numbers. It is a point weapon, which means that you hit with the point of the blade. You cannot hit with the sides of the blade or the edges of the blade. Full body is target, so from the top of your head to the bottom of your toes. And if you both hit, you both get a point. There's no rules called right-of-way in it. Right-of-way is kind of like something that governs foil and saber. Basically, if 2 people hit and both lights are on the machine, only one person can get the point, and it's usually the attacker or the person who stops the attack last. Next is foil. Foil is another point weapon, so you have to hit with the point. However, the target is only the torso, so that's it. Saber, which is what we teach here, is very fast compared to the other 2. The other 2 keep time in them, which means you run a clock down. And in saber, you don't run any time because it goes so fast that by the time you set a clock to go, it would just be stopped again. Saber, you're allowed to hit with the edge of the blade. It's a cutting weapon instead of a point or thrust weapon. Waist up through head, all the way down to the bottom of the sleeves is the target for saber. So there's a lot of places that you can hit. What happens first is the referee is kind of in control of the bout. So there's a referee and 2 fencers. And the referee is going to get them on guard on the fencing strip and then have them test, which is just basically hitting to make sure everything that works. And then is going to say on guard, ready, fence.
Guard, ready, fence.
And once they say fence, the fencers are allowed to choose whatever action they want within the rules to hit each other. And once they score, it's up to the referee to parse the actions and tell us whose point it was and why it was their point. Some different actions that happen in fencing would be an attack. So in saber, the person who attacks gets the point unless their attack is stopped in some way. So if someone stops an attack, they can do that a couple of different ways. One example would be a parry riposte, which is just hitting the blade and blocking the blade and then hitting that person. Or it could be by dodging or making that person miss and then taking over with your own attack. It could be with a counterattack, which you usually have to set up as a single light action, so you have to make it so that they can't hit you at the same time, otherwise it would be their point. So there was a study that was done where they actually determined that fencing was one of the safer sports in the Olympics in terms of injury rate while at the Olympics. One of the reasons for that is all the protective gear that we use. It is a very moderated sport when it comes to the gear, from the blades to the jackets that you wear, all have like safety ratings that have to be adhered to. For women and girls, we have to wear a chest protector, and that's like a hard plastic covering that goes over the chest. Men can wear them as well, but it's not required based on the rules. The next one is a plastron, or an underarm protector, which is a single sleeve that goes on your handedness side. So if you're left-handed, it goes on your left side. If you're right-handed, it goes on your right side. And what that does is when you put the jacket on, the jacket has a seam that goes up the center, and the plastron has seams on either side of that. So if something were to break and go through that seam on your jacket, it would be stopped by the plastron. The other is the mask, which is, of course, like rated a certain way to resist a certain amount of force in order to be safe, and it's the same for the gear as well. I love fencing. It has been a constant in my life since I started it, and I love it because it's an individual sport, so you're kind of in control of yourself, and I feel like there's a lot of like self-discovery that you can make within an individual sport, and I love being able to share that as a coach with like my students as well, and see them like gain confidence, see them gain like that kind of personal responsibility and just grow as individuals, not just as athletes.
I've been fencing for almost a year now, and I like about it is that it makes my reflexes better, and it makes me able to think in tougher times and way faster.
I learned about like working with the team, and also like different skills for like PE and stuff.
I play competitive video games a lot of the time, and when I saw fencing on a TV show, it looked pretty fun. I was looking for a physical activity, and so it helps me keep in shape while also being pretty engaging.
Favorite part about fencing is the age range. I think there's like 12-year-olds here that still beat me, and then there's like 80-year-olds that I still beat. So it feels like no matter how old you are, you can still fence, which is nice.
I like that it's like a unique sport, but it's also really fun and engaging. I didn't want to play basketball in the winter, and so we were looking at other options. And we looked into fencing clubs, and we saw this one. If you want to learn to fence, it's a great place, and Anna Marie is amazing.
I also like how it's, for the most part, a really nice community, because we're a smaller community, because everybody kind of knows each other. You get to build a lot of relationships across like different fencing clubs in different regions within the United States. And I think that that's really important as a sport as well.
Next week, becoming a billionaire from problem solving. See his latest invention. Plus, a safe place for songbirds inside the Wild Bird Rehab Center. Thanks for watching Spotlight. Join us next Sunday at 9:30 a.m. on KPLR 11.